Nonetheless, here we are. These are recorded, so they will be on YouTube. Today's topic is the peak at the end of inspiration, and these are common vent issues. We see this a lot. And so I went out and today, as I was walking in the unit, got this case for all of us to discuss. So today is March 5th, 2024. This is VentRounds. So disclosures, there's no endorsement of any mode, manufacturer, or company. Whatever we say, it's our opinion. It does not represent the Cleveland Clinic. I'm Eduardo Mireles, and then Rob Chatburn, you can see it on the screen too. And we're the happy hosts of this team. There's Rob. Say hello, Rob.
Hello.
There we go. And so just let's talk a little bit about the cycle issues, and we've talked about this several times. But the part that we have to talk about when we think about cycle is if it's late or early. And technically early, I'll start by that one because it's easier to recognize. We always look at the flow waveform. The flow waveform helps you recognize early trigger, and you're going to see early cycle, because you're going to see an amputation of the normal peak flow that you see at the beginning of the expiratory phase. So what we're missing right here is this little peak that goes down and then comes like this. And that's because there's Pmus, which you can see on the top represented, and the breath cycled earlier, so the machine cycled earlier than the patient, and that's why it's called an early cycle. On the other side, you have a late cycle, and this is an example on pressure controlling, which you have the patient breath actually ended right here where there's no more flow. And there's different ways that the ventilators behave. Some ventilators don't let you exhale, and what you can see is that the patient finished inspiration, and actually during that period of time, there's no flow. And the pressure, which probably was the ventilator was trying to keep around here, rises because the patient is, the muscles and the chest wall relaxed, and now you can see it's a sort of plateau pressure, if you may, at that time. Some ventilators don't do this pause, and actually you can exhale during it, and you'll see the flow going below the baseline. Both are markers of a late cycle. And then a third one, which is normal. And in this example now, as we start learning more, some of you may call this a cycling an over assistance in which the patient just triggered. And technically, this would be a very late cycle, but it's a patient that barely had some effort to trigger the ventilator, and then the ventilator did the rest. And this may be a manifestation of our assistance. Now, in retrospect, I can voice that out. Rob, any comments about this?
Just that, like you said, in the first example, technically you could say that's a late cycle, but in practice, it's not a bad thing.
It depends the situation in which the patient is, right? So if you're thinking that if this patient had, for example, a pH that it's alkalotic, and you're trying to have some Pmus, this is over assistance. But it may be a patient in which the pH is perfectly normal, and you're assisting the full ventilation because that's what the patient has. So there's a clinical spectrum here, without a doubt. Thank you, Rob, for highlighting that. All right, so here's the patient that I saw this morning as I was walking through the unit. And we're gonna just walk through this in a classic pathway of starting by the tag. And again, I'm not hiding any information as we go through this. And so the first one is, what's the tag? And I don't have the ability to see right now the chat, just because this is a new type of device, not device, but it seems that they changed WebEx, so I cannot see what I want to see. So Rob, if they put there,
yep,
you're able to see the chat?
Yep.
Okay. So what would be the tag for the team, or if you want to unmute and let us know what the tag is? Rob, has they put anything in? Not so far.
Volume control CMVS. Pressure control CSVS, another CSVS.
Yeah. Good. So I'm glad that you guys are recognizing pressure control, and we know this is pressure because the flow is not controlled at all. And actually, you can see this patient is actually every single effort is pretty similar. The tidal volume varies a little bit between both of them, but this is a patient that is doing effort during inspiration, and the pressure is trying to be controlled. But the ventilators, as we have said several times, are not necessarily good controllers. I mean, they are mediocre at controlling pressure. They try, but they are not very good. So this is pressure control. And then I heard CSV, which means that all breaths are triggered by the patient and cycled by the patient. So this is triggered by the patient. In this case, it's a flow trigger, and it's cycled by flow, which is also a signal that comes from the patient. So it's CSV. And it's set point. We know that it's set point because we set actually the pressure support above PEEP at 5, and the PEEP and the cycle threshold is set by us based on the flow that the patient does in relationship to the peak. So this is set point. So Rob, any comments here?
No, except that one person said volume control, and they might have gotten confused by looking at the flow waveform. You know, we always say look at the flow waveform first. If you just looked at the flow and said, well, it looked pretty constant, but you didn't notice that the tidal volumes are all different, that would reflect the fact that the flows are all different as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Roberto. So if we think about the load during inspiration, what's the main load here?
You got Pmus on inspiration, Pmus. Everybody's recognizing that.
And we recognize that because normally, if this was a passive model, what we would expect would be a beautiful decaying curve. And instead of that, we see all this curvature on top, which is consistent with the presence of effort, Pmus, from the patient. And that's essential for us to recognize. Actually, there's been some papers out there recognizing this into algorithms of saying how much Pmus is there present for the patients. And then during expiration, what do you think? Pmus, elastic, resistive? What is the feeling in the group?
Elastic, resistive, one of each.
So there's balance
Some
here.
Pmus. So we got one of each, elastic, resistive, and Pmus.
Yeah. So these ones are a little bit tricky. Whenever I see these, it makes me wonder. I mean, without a doubt, you can see a little bit of exponential decay occurring on the curves, right? You see that exponential decay. At the beginning, it's not beautiful. There seems to be a little bit of other curvature, but I would say in general, it does look like there's an exponential decay, but not as beautiful as you would want. And without a doubt, it's taking almost 2 seconds to exhale the tidal volume that the patient put in. So I would suspect that there is either some amount of Pmus or there is a resistive component. Roberto?
Yep, it sort of looks like that because, you know, you don't get the zero flow before the next inspiration.
Yeah. All right. So and sometimes this will happen. You will not be able to differ between one or the other when there's presence of Pmus, and there's some maneuvers that we can do. We'll take a look at them in a second. In terms of pressure ventilation, the pressure patient ventilator discordance. In terms of trigger, what do we think? Normal, early, late, false, or failed?
Normal. We got one normal, another normal, another normal.
Yeah, so I think that in general, we can see how it's a flow trigger because there's a color change here, and it basically crosses over and rapidly pressurizes the system. There is a dip here on the pressure, but that's a manifestation of the effort of the patient and the pressure not being well controlled. But I think that normal is a good statement there. In terms of inspiration, is there assistance, over assistance, or under assistance?
Under, 3 unders.
And this is a tricky one in a sense. I mean, we have defined under assistance in a major is when the pressure crosses below the baseline, or it's close or at the baseline, and there's still support on this patient above the baseline if you notice. So I would say my feeling is that this is on the assistance group, because the patient is getting support throughout. There is no doubt there is work shifting, but there is the question is this inappropriate for this amount of the patient or not? Roberto, what do you think here?
Well, first of all, there was a comment, does it have to be more negative than PEEP?
Yeah.
I think if you were going to say, good over assistance, a high degree of over assistance, probably yes, but that's not happening here. Pressure stays above a baseline throughout inspiration. As you mentioned, there are algorithms available now where ventilators or associated equipment can estimate what Pmus is. So you could theoretically compare Pmus with Pvent to see how much work shifting there is. That's not commercially available yet. The way I like to think about it is the way you drew in on the flow waveform, those hash lines, the flow that's above the passive exponential decay, that's all due to Pmus. And because the area under the flow time curve is volume, you can see that the area due to Pmus is bigger than the area due to Pvent, right?
Yeah.
So more than half of the tidal volume is being generated by the patient's own muscles. Now, the question is, well, clearly that's work shifting. So the question is it too much or not? Well, I think that depends on the clinical context. If this happened to be, let's say, a spontaneous breathing trial, then probably not, right? It's probably a good thing. But if the patient was just anxious and was very sick, then probably a bad thing in terms of too much work shifting.
Excellent. Great points, Rob. And I love the way that you make this in a mathematical model of saying, well, how much is it being done by the patient and how much is being done by the ventilator based on what would be the expected curve for the patient. There's some ways that we can measure Pmus on this. And so you could technically, and actually I did, and I'll show you in a second, because I want to make a question in a couple of seconds. We'll come back to that regarding how much Pmus are we generating here. But great points.
Can I make an observation, Eduardo?
Of course.
If PAP is 11, we are on PEEP of 5, pressure support of 5. The 11, which is the peak, I'm assuming, the 10 should be closer, the pressure support should be closer to the peak and it's way below.
Yeah, I'm going to show you a couple of images that will help you a little bit to see this better. So just bear with me. Bear with the program. You'll see. It's actually, you're gonna like it. You may not like it, but I think that you're gonna like it. So what about cycle? And here we end up talking about cycle, and we see the peak at the end. Is it normal, early, or late?
Normal.
Early cycle and a normal cycle.
Nobody put late?
Nobody put late yet.
No late. All
There's
right.
another early.
Yeah, so remember
early. There we go. There's a late. Ariel says late, normal to late. The pressure spike is elastic recoil. That's one of the comments.
Excellent. So,
Could be,
I mean, in general terms, when I'm the teaching is that when you're looking at the cycle in pressure control, you're looking at the flow, right? And so in a patient that is having a late cycles, that you would have this peak or this increase in pressure because the patient is exhaling against the bulb, you would expect to see a pause, like this one over here, that little ledge that you see there. And you don't see that here. Actually, the pressure goes straight down without any fear. And this has been written, and Magdi Yunus has a very nice paper talking about this, that this is a failure of the ventilator to control the pressure appropriately in the face of rapidly shifting from inspiration to expiration, if that makes sense. So the patient inhaled, and then it relaxed its muscles and went to exhalation, or it goes from inspiration to exhalation actively, which we don't see right now. And so I would call this normal, and I will show you a couple of items to make that point. But this is a common area of concern when we see this peak because of the thought that this is a late cycle. And then during expiration, I would say that there's no work, but I would say between normal and expiratory work. Rob, any comments there?
Well, maybe you could justify why you think this is normal and not late, given what you just said about.
So here comes Eduardo's trial on patient, okay? So I grabbed, this is the patient, exactly the same patient, no different, okay? So, and this may convince others otherwise, actually, but this is the patient, I put it at 1% end inspiration, so definitely trying to make a late expiratory effort, right? Oh, by the way, before I go there, let me show you this one over here. So you saw how we were talking about the Pmus on the patient, and I did a POC on the patient. And you can see that the effort is it goes slow, and then it relaxes, and it goes down on the expiratory phase. On the inspiratory phase, it just suddenly relaxes. So I just wanted to show that. So now you have a visual on what's happening here and how it activates relatively slowly and then relaxes. So I went from 1% to 10%, and you can still see that there's no ledge. 30%, no ledge. But the size of these little big starts becoming a little bit smaller, right? It seems smaller. And I put two reference lines here for you, Ariel, so that you could see one for the peak and the other one for the, and the patient was set at 30%. I didn't mention that. When I came, the patient was set at 30. And then I put it at 50%. And the big decrease somewhat, the ledge is the same. So to me, this is the amount of pressure support that the ventilator is doing. The other one is the artifact. Then I went to 60%. And with 60%, you can see the ledge is still there. And it was not until I got to 70%. I mean, I don't know if you have ever set a peak end expiratory flow at 70%, but it's very rare that you get to that level. It was the limit of the ventilator. And you can see that finally at that level, the peak was smaller. However, the tidal volume dropped at that point. So the amount of support. And what I'm not showing here is that the peak of the peak of the expiratory flow started to get lost. You can see how it's present on at 10, still present. Somewhat starts going away, and then it's become smaller. So moving between going into an earlier kind of effort, there's still some effort from the patient. So, I mean, I don't think that this is a solvable issue. The question is, would this be dangerous for the patient, A, to have that peak? And that's one of the questions. Should I be correcting it? Or is it a futile exercise on doing this and getting all the way there? So this is actual patient. So I would like to hear your thoughts, Roberto, and obviously of the audience.
Well, first of all, just to clarify what you just said, could you draw in what you visualized Pmus was on the first and last image?
Where the Pmus is?
Yeah, if you were to draw Pmus, what would it look like on the first image and the last?
I don't have to draw it. I can show it. It's right here. So it peaks and it relaxes.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. So the point is that what you did by changing the cycle threshold was you got the cycling closer to the neural inspiratory time, right?
Yeah, to the end of it, yes.
Now, whether or not that has any clinical significance, I don't know, but compare that to, for example, if this patient had been on NAVA. NAVA would cycle off using the EDI at about 70% of peak, right?
Yeah.
So you could argue that, I think I would tend to argue that what you were doing here was making a late cycle into a normal cycle, the same way you would if you just put the patient on NAVA.
Fair enough. That's a good point. So, I mean, we would, and actually this is a good point, Roberto. So you would agree that in this patient, in the 1%, that is consistent with late cycle, right? So, I mean, the
Yes,
peak is
yes, that's what I'm saying,
huge,
yes.
is long,
Yes.
but there's no ledge to talk about. It's just that the patient relaxes really rapidly.
Yep.
And so the waveform doesn't look like such. And the only thing that you have is this marker over here. And to get rid of it, I had to go all the way to 60%. So that was probably the closest, but I started touching in between with an early cycle. So probably 50 is the closest that I could get to matching this patient, or 55 perhaps. Yeah, go ahead.
Or been able to move people off.
Sorry?
Oop, my poster went down. Eduardo, did you have the chance to do an inspiratory pause?
No, but you have the inspiratory pause right here, technically, almost there, right?
Yes, but what I'm trying to say, you can see the pressure muscle index. And if you get a pause after, it only reflects the period from the muscle relaxation until the system gets in equilibrium.
Yeah.
So in a few words, I think like from the volume from the point where pressure starts rising, is just a passive scenario caused by the elastic recoil.
Repeat that. Sorry.
But what I'm saying is like, if you get a plateau after a nice plateau, you can see that the difference is generated by the muscle pressure. But the closer you are cutting a passive going from the pressure support to the pressure plateau. In a few words, is totally passive what you see.
Yes.
It's
So
like a passive inspiratory pause in pressure support.
yeah. So if you do a pause here, you would have the addition of what the Pmus contributed. That's that's what you're saying, correct?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
you are getting different passive transition from pressure support to pressure plateau.
Yeah, that's why the plateau pressure is going to be different on every breath when you have a spontaneous breath. And you can't even get it on some ventilators. I think you can do it on the servo.
That's why that. Sorry,
so
those spike to me doesn't mean that there is Pmus.
Ariel, let me go back a little bit, but because this is an important thing, right? So this is when we define cycle as a normal, early or late. If you define this as late, right, then you would start saying, well, you need to the normal is to increase your end inspiration so that you would get rid of it if it was a negative, if it had a negative features for the patient, which puts into question the MacD-Yunis paper of saying, well, is this just the relaxation of the patient and the adjustment of the ventilator, and does it matter, right? So you can see I went all the way to 60. So if I had done a study, I would have said it doesn't affect at all the presence of this item. And actually, I started getting some features that are consistent with early cycle on this patient. So I don't know.
You know, we always define on pressure support that we cannot have inspiratory pauses. intentional inspiratory pauses. But according to what we are seeing, we can have an intentional inspiratory pauses caused by Pmus relaxation.
Well, there's not a pause, but there's, I mean, what you would expect is that if this was a perfect controller, that this would end up right here, right? Or closer to it.
Yeah.
So there's not a pause per se, it's just the muscles are relaxing rapidly. And so you see this, and the shorter I make it, the less, I mean, I'm doing this intentionally to get rid of it. But it's a relaxation of the muscle, of the muscles. They are, the effort has stopped. So this is what we're seeing, right? So if I imagine that, remember, this is the waveform for your Pmus. So the patient is relaxing and then rapidly comes down. And that's that peak that I'm seeing over here. So without a doubt, actually, it fits very nicely on this image from the white line to the dark line. This is the delay then on the system to stop. That's what you're saying, right, Roberto?
So it has to do with like the actual output.
I didn't understand what you just said.
That the breath ended up right here at this peak.
Oh, you mean like
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And so all of this time from here to here is what it would be a late cycle, technically.
Yeah, because they're trying to relax and they can't exhale.
Yeah, and so if we were on NAVA, actually it uses 70%, so it would end up around here.
Yep.
So probably closer to what I was doing over here, right?
Yep. Exactly. That's what I was thinking. Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, very interesting discussion. I mean, there's as we always talk, there has to be a lot of structured discussions about this because otherwise we will be calling one thing or the other. But I technically, at this point, I don't know if I would change anything on the management of the patient. I don't know what's the significance of this, and I don't think anybody knows. I also wanted to show, I wanted to ask the team, what was how much do you think Pmus, and a lot of you thought that there was under assistance, right? This was the common thread. So when we measure the POC, and somebody asked, the POC went from, this is 0, from here to here, it's from 5 to 0. So the POC, the pressure was just 5 centimeters. And then I measured also the PO1 on this patient, the amount of drive. And I did it actually following Irene Telia's description that in this ventilator it is calculated. And so if you don't use a pressure trigger with low sensitivity, you may underestimate, but at 0.8, which is the lower threshold or the lower numbers, it usually performs very well. And you can see that when I changed to a pressure trigger, it still remained at 0.8. So not very high drive, right? It's actually normal drive, not very high work of breathing. It's 5 centimeters of water. And the patient is getting 5 centimeters of pressure support throughout. So it's around 50% of the work is being assisted, I guess, Rob, if I put it from that standpoint. What do you think about that?
That's what I said before. Half of the tidal volume is due to the patient.
Exactly. So, I mean, this is an interesting fact. I mean, when I saw this and I was at the bedside, I also said, oh, this patient is not getting much support. But once I did PO, said, oh, it's not actually, the patient is not doing that much work compared to the what I'm measuring right now. So again, this is an area for us to research. This patient cannot be extubated for other reasons. That's why it's still on the ventilator, but I thought that it would be interesting for all of you to visit this item. So in summary, we discussed this beak at the end of the breath. It's a common item. In general, we have not considered this to be a late cycle, but this demonstration demonstrates that it may be a manifestation of late cycle of the dysregulation of the ventilator and how it cycles on, and it's dependent on how we set the end inspiratory. We also reviewed the POC and the PO1 in an assessment of this patient's level of assistance. versus the visual assessments that we did. So with that, thank you very much for your attendance. I hope that this triggered a lot of thoughts in your mind of how can we assess these patients and what other work that we can do to improve how we describe synchrony and assistance on our patients. This is the code for the Cleveland Clinic providers. There's CRCs for all RTs that are connected. Please fill up the evaluation. And as usual, please send us your images. We really enjoy looking at them and actually posting them here. You can send me emails, and Robos loves to receive these emails and talk to them. And all of the prior vent rounds are there. We're at 67 right now, so woohoo, we're en route to 100. So with that, we stop. Any comments from the team that you want to address? Sorry for 7 minutes late.
Eduardo, I call those spikes an optical illusion. I don't know if you feel that can be an optical illusion tricking us, or it's I don't know how would you define it?
Well, I have called them artifacts of pressurization rather than optical illusions because they are there and I can see them. They're not optical. They're actually the ventilator response and trying to adjust to pressurization. But I think that the discussion is a little bit deeper than that, which is how do we define on a mode that in which you don't set the eye time, cycle, early cycle and late cycle.
Still something that still doesn't make sense to me, like the 5+5 is the peak. It seems to be way higher than the 11 that is reporting on the vent.
Yeah, and so that's why I did the measurements, and I have another slide where I measured it, and it's in that example was around 13, and then I measured. You see, there's a passive breath on the side. I measured that one, and it was around the same height for this, and you can actually. I mean, I have it elsewhere, but it's 10. So this plateau that you see here is 10. It's just 5 above the peak. Very good. Excellent comments. Really appreciate it. I hope that this opens more and stimulates more thought process into it. And little by little, we'll start defeating ignorance. Thank you. Bye-bye.